Hey everybody, Dirty Dan here. It's about time that I finally talk about this locomotive. This is my custom Pennsylvania Railroad I-1210 Decapod. And of course, the face of my very own YouTube channel. I've never really talked about this locomotive a whole lot before. I always meant to get around to making a dedicated video to it, but it just never happened. So without further ado, let's take a look at how I built it. I bought this locomotive nearly 4 years ago from an old acquaintance of mine, way out west. Package unboxing day. On to the final piece. Oh my gosh, that tender. That's beautiful. I cannot wait to see this locomotive. I literally cannot wait. Oh, look at that. That is so cool. Ah, that's awesome. All right, here we go. Whoa. Oh my God. Oh, this is beautiful. Oh, the shell just kind of popped off. Well, that's okay. Let me kind of put that back on. But oh my gosh, there it is. The Penline 210. Wow, is this thing beautiful. I have wanted one of these for so long, and to have one in my hands is awesome. I am very excited to get this thing up and running. And get it running, I did. This is one of the very first videos that I ever took of this thing in action. As you can tell though, there's bigger issues than just the mechanical side of things. This locomotive is a far cry away from how I first bought it. As you can see, parts of the locomotive weren't even painted, including the pilot, the cylinders, the rods, and it looked like the boiler was still in the original black from the factory. So of course the very first thing that I did is strip it all down. Once I had completely stripped all the old paint off of this thing, it became easier to figure out exactly which direction I was headed with it. I never really intended to go as far as I did with it. I just kept adding on as I worked on it. A lot of the initial construction consisted of mostly small detail work like piping, handrails, and other such details. Once I had gotten a good bit of these small details worked out, I laid down my first coat of primer. The first piece of this locomotive that actually got painted coincidentally was the cylinders. This was mainly just a test of the rattle can and the color to see if I really liked it. Right after this first bit of painting was even more small detail work. A good bit of this process was just spent on filling imperfections in the metal casting of the shell. This locomotive had a hard life beforehand, and it really showed. One of the things that I spent a lot of time doing was test fitting. Making sure that all your pieces go together properly is key to having a good finished product. I spent a lot of time on the chassis for this locomotive as well. A lot of the parts for the valve gear were just outright missing when I got it. Now things were finally starting to get to the point of paint. Honestly, it was a pretty big moment when I saw some paint on this thing for the very first time. It was at this point that I really started to hone in on the vision I had for this locomotive. Next up was starting to paint the chassis. I laid down some flat black and started doing white walls. I know that this isn't a prototypical choice for this locomotive, but personally, I really love the look of them on it. Not to mention the fact that these were all done by hand with a brush. Probably one of the most difficult parts of this whole project. Then came the very first water slide decals. I actually found myself painting a lot of the details separate from the locomotive during all this. In the picture that you're seeing right now, it's clear that things are really starting to come together. To anyone ever trying to apply decals to a headlight, don't. Just don't. After messing around with these numbers for what seemed like hours, I finally got them to stick. Shortly after, I started installing all of the separately applied details like pipes, compressors. At this point, it was all just down to some final test fitting before clear coat. Man, that's a sharp locomotive.
finally the scary part was over with. Clear coat can be especially finicky sometimes. And here's the first look at what it was starting to look like as it was coming together. The transformation here is just incredible, considering the locomotive's not even finished in this picture. Then it was time to reassemble all the valve gear. And finally, the locomotive assembled for the very first time. And then, of course, with the tender. Everything about this locomotive is impressive to me. And personally, this is probably one of my favorite models in my whole collection. I then went on to display this very locomotive at my high school art show. That was on top of the already impressive diorama I had built that year. One of my favorite moments with this locomotive was getting to run it on a full-size club layout. Seeing this thing pull a full string of hoppers for the very first time was just incredible. Getting to run my locomotive in this sort of setting for the first time was just an experience that I'll never forget. Putting countless amounts of time, money, and effort into a model to finally see it in operation is something beautiful. This will forever be one of my favorite models that I'll ever own, and I really hope that you folks liked it too. With that, I'd like to thank you all for watching.